It wasn't about the money. I kept telling Sarah, okay, that's a lie. It was absolutely about the money. But I also framed it as stability, a regular paycheck. Something predictable. After the surgery, after the bills started piling up, everything felt like it was spinning. This job, even if it was unconventional, felt solid, like a brick wall, which honestly was a relief. Anything was better than constantly checking the eviction notice website and pretending I hadn't. I pictured the kids sketching with me on FaceTime, their little faces small on the screen, and told myself this was for them too. A dad who wasn't constantly stressed about keeping a roof over their heads. That felt solid too. The building itself smelled like dust and regret. Not a sharp, unpleasant smell, just old, like a forgotten attic. It was a squat brick building wedged between a laundromat and a tax preparation office, all the windows tinted a dark, murky green. Security, the owner, a guy named Lorne, had said with a shrug. Inside, it was worse. Rows and rows of glass display cases crammed with forgotten treasures and broken dreams. Old watches, chipped porcelain dolls, a taxidermied badger. The fluorescent lights hummed, a constant low thrum that made my teeth ache. The counter was thick, scarred formica, and behind it, a maze of security cameras pointed every which way. There were 2 chairs in the waiting area, upholstered in a faded floral print that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 1970s. The air was cool even for October, and a faint smell of metal polish hung in the air. It wasn't a place anyone wanted to be, but people ended up here when they needed something, or when they were out of options. Lorne was finishing up paperwork when I arrived, barely looking up as he rattled off instructions. He was a small man, all angles and nervous energy. He didn't offer me a break or even a good luck, just a quick rundown of the security system, and then, without warning, he launched into it. Right, rules. There are a few. Old Man Hemlock, the previous guy, was particular. Wrote them all down. Just gotta follow them, all right? Don't ask why, just do. He didn't make eye contact, just kept scribbling on a form. Number 1, do not leave your personal bag, coat, or belongings unattended anywhere on the premises. Keep them with you or locked in your designated locker. I scribbled it down in a small notepad I'd brought. No leaving stuff around. Seemed reasonable. Probably had to do with theft. 2, if you find a clock on the premises showing a different time than the others, do not correct it. Note the time it shows and keep that note on your person for the remainder of the shift. He said it quickly, almost like he was embarrassed. I blinked. A clock? What was that about? Probably just Hemlock being eccentric. Old guys and their clocks. 3, on arriving at the start of every shift, say the following phrase aloud before doing anything else. Caelthus Sunstrider. You do not need to understand it. I paused, pen hovering over the page. Caelthas Sunstrider, I asked, but Lorne was already moving on. 4, if someone addresses you as if they know you but you do not recognize them, do not confirm or deny how you know them. Treat the interaction as a case of mistaken identity and disengage politely. That felt oddly specific, but maybe he'd had a lot of weird customers. 5, cover, avoid, or do not look at the security monitors after 1:17 a.m. I frowned. The monitors, why? Just do it, Lorne snapped, finally looking up. He looked tired, almost haunted. 6, before turning any corner in the back storage room, knock twice on the wall and wait 3 seconds before proceeding. Okay, I said slowly. This was getting a little strange. 7, if someone is in the public waiting area after closing time, do not approach them alone. Alert a coworker first. If no coworker is available, do not approach. Right, I said, feeling a flicker of something I didn't want to identify. 8, at 2 a.m., check the roof access door. If it is unlocked, lock it. Do not look up before securing it. Do not check what may be on the roof. I almost laughed. A roof check? This was getting ridiculous. He was probably messing with me, testing me. And finally, if furniture or equipment has been moved overnight from its established position, log it but do not move it back. Work around it. Lorne tossed the pen back onto the counter. That's it. Just try to make it to 6 a.m. and don't cause any trouble. He disappeared into his office, leaving me alone with the list and the humming fluorescent lights. I reread the rules, a small smile playing on my lips. It was quirky, sure, but harmless. Just a few weird habits of a previous employee, probably a bit of a control freak. I tossed the notepad into my locker, grabbed my jacket, and glanced at the clock above the counter. 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes to go. I took a deep breath, trying to ignore the prickle of unease at the back of my neck, and said a little too loudly, Caelthus Sunstrider. It felt wrong, like saying the name of something you shouldn't. I quickly dismissed the feeling, just a silly phrase. That's all. I checked the security monitors. Everything normal. The waiting area was empty. The street outside was deserted. I sat down at the counter, the formica cold and smooth under my elbows, and stared at the clock. 12 a.m. My shift had officially begun. I noticed the small circular scratch on the formica directly in front of me. I hadn't seen it before. The chipped formica was surprisingly cool against my forearm as I counted out the change for a late-night energy drink purchase. Zane, one of the regulars, was coming in for his usual fix before his graveyard shift at the plastics factory. He barely grunted a greeting, just slapped down $5 and waited. I knew he hated making small talk. Most people who came in this late didn't. They just wanted what they needed and wanted to get out. "That'll be $2.37, I said, handing him the drink and the change. He took it without a word and headed for the door, the little bell above it jingling faintly as he left. It was quiet again. Too quiet. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder all of a sudden. I pushed the change drawer closed with a soft click and glanced at the security monitors. Nothing. Just empty streets and the flickering neon sign of the diner across the road. I had to check the inventory on the display case. Lorne had been writing me about properly logging everything, even the little stuff. He was a stickler for details, which was annoying, but I needed the job. Bills weren't going to pay themselves. I grabbed the inventory sheet and a pen and started meticulously counting the pocket knives, the lighters, the costume jewelry. It was mind-numbing work, but it kept my hands busy, and it gave me a chance to sketch in the margins. I drew a quick cartoon of Elma, my oldest, dressed as a superhero, cape flapping in the wind. I'd texted to her mom later. My bag was in the break room. Just a worn canvas messenger bag. Nothing special. Wallet, phone, a half-eaten granola bar, the sketchbook. I'd left it on the table when I came back out to handle a phone call from a potential seller earlier. Now I needed my phone to scan the barcodes on the jewelry. I started to stand up, intending to just pop into the break room and grab it. It was only a few steps away. As I stood, a scent, sharp and metallic, pricked at the back of my throat. Not blood, exactly. More like old coins, but amplified, disagreeable. It was faint, but definitely there. I paused, mid-motion, sniffing the air. It wasn't coming from outside. It seemed to be in the air around the counter. Then, a tiny scraping sound, like fingernails on glass, made me freeze. It came from the direction of the break room. I hadn't noticed it before, too focused on the inventory. I glanced at the doorway. Nothing. But the scent was stronger now, and the scraping sound had stopped. I remembered the rules. Not specifically, but the gist of it. Something about keeping your belongings with you, not leaving them unattended. Lorne had stressed it, hadn't he? An open invitation, he'd said, and now I was remembering a fragment about what that invitation was for. Something about access. I didn't understand it, and frankly, I didn't want to. I just remembered the feeling of Lorne's gaze on me when he said it. A cold, flat intensity that had unsettled me. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. The shop was old. It probably creaked and settled all the time. I was tired, stressed about the bills, and letting Lorne's weird rules get to me. But I didn't move. I stayed rooted to the spot, staring at the break room doorway. Instead, I walked to my locker and retrieved my phone. It was a bit of a walk, an unnecessary one considering my bag was closer, but it felt safer. I scanned the first piece of jewelry, a tarnished silver locket. The barcode beeped. Everything seemed normal, except the smell. It lingered, a faint coppery tang on my tongue. Later, when I finally did go to the break room to get my bag, it was exactly where I'd left it, on the table. The granola bar was still half-eaten. My phone was missing. I checked my pockets under the counter, everywhere. It wasn't there, and on the table next to my bag was a single tarnished penny. It hadn't been there before. I hadn't even seen a penny in this place. I picked it up. It was cold. I started sorting through the lost and found. It was a pathetic collection, really. A single glove, a chipped coffee mug with a faded band logo, 2 mismatched earrings, a kid's drawing of a dinosaur that looked more like a lumpy green potato. Lorne insisted I catalog everything, even the obvious trash. He said it was a matter of principle. People deserve to know if their things are here, Kieran. It's about respect, which felt rich coming from Lorne. He didn't exactly radiate respect. The box was under the counter, next to the security monitor. It was a flimsy cardboard thing. Taped shut, I grabbed a box cutter from the drawer. Another thing Lorne insisted on having a dedicated tool for, and sliced through the tape. It smelled like dust and old plastic. I pulled out the first item, the glove, brown leather, worn at the fingertips. Probably been here for months. I kept a running list on a notepad. 1 brown leather glove, 1 chipped coffee mug, 2 mismatched earrings. It wasn't exactly stimulating work, but it was quiet. The early morning hours were usually slow. Most of the action happened later, when people were desperate enough to pawn their valuables. I sketched a little caricature of Rue, the cashier from the grocery store, giving me a sympathetic look. She'd always been nice. I missed the small talk, even the annoying bits. I was halfway through the box when I saw it. A small antique clock, brass casing, ornate hands. It looked completely out of place with the rest of the junk. It wasn't plugged in. It wasn't even meant to be a wind-up. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It felt heavier than it looked. I wound the stem. The gears whirred to life and the hands began to move. They stopped at 3:17. That was odd. It was currently 2:53. I glanced at the digital clock on the microwave, then at the security monitor displaying the time from the computer system. Both read the same, 2:53. I told myself it was just broken, an old clock, probably hadn't been wound in years. It was a coincidence it started working at all, but then I remembered the rules. That vague, unsettling feeling, the pressure behind my eyes when I tried to recall them, something about discrepancies, things out of place, Lorne's warning about not interfering. I remembered a fragmented thought. Don't adjust it, don't touch it. Something about observing, noting, and leaving things as they are. Something about consequences. It wasn't a clear rule, not like the one about the belongings, but the feeling was the same. A cold prickle of anxiety. I needed to know if it was just broken. I needed to reset it, to confirm it wasn't some kind of signal. I reached for the hands, my fingers hovering just above the glass. But the memory of Lorne's flat, unwavering stare stopped me. The certainty in his voice when he'd told me about the importance of following the instructions. It was just a clock. I could leave it. I grabbed the notepad and scribbled down, "Antique clock, reads 3:17 a.m. at the bottom of the list. I ripped the page out and folded it, tucking it into my shirt pocket. A stupid thing to do, but I felt compelled, like I had to have that time with me. I continued sorting through the box. A broken umbrella, a single sock. A plastic dinosaur, ironically, much more accurate than the drawing from earlier. I finished the inventory, sealed the box back up, and put it back under the counter. The digital clock on the microwave ticked over to 3 o'clock, then 3:01. I felt a strange tightness in my chest. I had a text from my wife, Lisa. "Did you remember to call Dr. Flores about the refill?" I hadn't. I'd been so focused on the inventory, the clock, the creeping feeling of unease that I'd completely forgotten. Lisa needed that medication. It was for the migraines, the ones that left her bedridden for days. I stared at the phone in my hand, the text glowing in the dim light. I couldn't call now. I couldn't risk leaving the counter, even for a minute. Not with that clock ticking away somewhere in the back of my mind. Not with 3:17 stuck in my pocket. I texted her back. "Almost done, we'll call first thing." A lie. But what else could I do? The chipped formica of the counter felt cool under my forearms. I was pricing costume jewelry, tangled necklaces, single earrings, plastic bracelets that probably cost 10 cents to manufacture and would fetch $1 if I was lucky. It was mindless work, the kind that let my brain drift. I was thinking about the little car Rue wanted, the red one with the spoiler, and whether I could possibly swing a down payment next month if things were good. Lisa had been hinting at it for her 8th birthday. I'd gotten into a rhythm, assigning prices based on the weight of the metal and the flashiness of the stones, mostly glass, of course, a lot of rhinestones. Old Man Hemlock hadn't exactly been meticulous about inventory, which meant a lot of reevaluation on my end. Lorne hadn't said anything about it, just handed me the rules and the key. It felt like he expected me to just figure it out. The door chime hadn't rung in almost an hour. The silence was usually a good thing, less hassle, but tonight it felt heavy, like the air was pressing in. I shook my head, blaming the coffee. It was lukewarm and stale, but it was all I had. I probably needed to brew another pot, but I didn't want to leave the counter, not even for 5 minutes. I glanced at the security monitors. Nothing, just static on the outside cameras, the blurry shapes of the aisles, the empty break room. I went back to the necklaces, sorting through a pile of tarnished silver chains. It was then I realized I hadn't said it. The phrase, Cael'thas Sunstrider. I hadn't said Cael'thas Sunstrider when I'd clocked in this morning. I'd been rushing. Lisa had been running a fever. I'd barely remembered to grab my lunch. I'd just swiped my card, grabbed the key, and started sorting through the returns. It hadn't even occurred to me. A cold wave washed over my chest. Not a chill, but a kind of hollow ache. It wasn't like the feeling when you forget something important, a birthday or an appointment. It was different. A wrongness. Like a key not quite fitting the lock. I told myself it was ridiculous. Some arbitrary phrase, something Hemlock probably made up to feel important. Lorne hadn't stressed it, hadn't even explained it. It was probably just a quirk, a holdover from the previous employee. I'd been here for 3 nights now, everything had been fine. I was being paranoid. But the air had felt different when I'd walked in this morning. Not bad, exactly, just unresponsive. Like the shop hadn't acknowledged my arrival. I hadn't noticed it at the time, too preoccupied with getting settled. But now, sitting here, the memory was sharp and unsettling. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I had to do it. It couldn't hurt. I took a deep breath, trying to ignore the tightness in my throat. Cael'thas Sunstrider. The words felt strange in my mouth, foreign and brittle. I said them louder, clearer, forcing myself to meet the gaze of the security camera above the door. Nothing happened. No dramatic shift in the lighting, no sudden noise, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint crackle of the monitors. But something had changed. I looked towards the back of the shop, towards the aisles crammed with furniture and electronics. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move. Not a person, not an animal, just a flicker, a distortion of the light. It was gone before I could focus on it, but the impression remained. Something had been there, something that hadn't been there before. I started to breathe faster, shallowly. I checked the monitors again, scanning each screen with frantic energy. Still nothing. But the feeling persisted. The shop felt watched. Not by a person, but by something else. Something ancient and indifferent. I walked back to the counter and picked up the notepad. I wrote down, said phrase late. Observed flicker in aisle 3. I capped the pen and stared at the note, the ink blurring slightly under the dim light. It wasn't the clock. It wasn't broken merchandise. It wasn't just a bad night. It was something else. And I had a feeling it was going to be a very long night. I had to keep working. I had to keep pricing the jewelry. I had to pretend everything was normal, even though nothing felt normal anymore. And I had to remember, every single time, to say the damn phrase. I was sorting through a box of costume jewelry, mostly chipped plastic and tarnished silver plate. It was the kind of stuff people brought in hoping for a miracle, and I was the one tasked with delivering the bad news. A whole lot of sentimental value, unfortunately, not much monetary value. It wasn't satisfying work, but it was quiet, and right now quiet was good. I was trying to get into a rhythm, separating earrings from necklaces, bracelets from rings, the metal cool and oddly comforting against my fingertips. I sorted by color mostly, trying to create some order in the chaos. It helped me avoid looking at the security monitors. The little plastic sorting trays were stacked on the counter, reflecting the fluorescent lights in a way that made my eyes ache. I'd been at it for almost 1 hour, and my back was starting to complain. I stretched, wincing as a muscle popped in my shoulder. I really needed to start doing those exercises Elma at the grocery store kept telling me about. She was a yoga instructor on the side and always had advice, most of which I ignored. It felt presumptuous somehow, like she was judging my posture. The automatic door hissed open, and I glanced up, automatically offering the practiced, tired smile I'd perfected over the last few weeks. A man stood there, bundled in a heavy coat despite it being late May. He wasn't anyone I recognized. Not a regular. He was maybe in his early 50s with thinning gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He was holding a small velvet box. "Kieran, good to see you," he said, his voice surprisingly warm. "Been a while." I blinked. Good evening, sir. Can I help you?" He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Oh, don't be like that. We've met before, you know, at the community fair last summer. Remember, you were with your kids." My mind scrambled. The community fair that felt like a lifetime ago. I vaguely remembered it, but I'd talked to dozens of people that day. "I'm sorry, sir, I don't recall." I kept my tone polite, neutral. It felt like a safe response. He waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, it was a busy day, lots of faces. No worries. I remember you being a big help with the raffle. You had a knack for keeping those kids in line." The raffle. My son, Leo, had been obsessed with winning the stuffed dinosaur. I'd spent a good 20 minutes trying to explain the concept of probability to a 6-year-old, but still, this man was a stranger. I didn't remember him at all. A weird tightness started to build in my chest, not entirely unpleasant, but definitely unsettling. It wasn't panic, more like a prickly awareness. The shift start phrase flashed in my mind unbidden. Kael'thas Sunstrider. I hadn't said it on time. It felt like the air in the shop had thickened, become harder to breathe. The man was still smiling, but his eyes were fixed on me, expectant, waiting for something. I remembered reading something about this in that ridiculous document Old Man Hemlock had made me sign. Something about people claiming to know you when they didn't. Don't confirm or deny. Disengage. That was the gist of it, I thought. It had seemed so specific, so unlikely, like a rule for a very strange, very niche situation. And yet here it was. I took a deep breath, deliberately slowing my heart rate. "I apologize for the confusion, sir. I get a lot of people coming through here. It's possible we crossed paths, but I don't have a strong recollection." It felt clumsy, overly formal, but it was the best I could manage. I forced myself to maintain eye contact, then quickly looked away, focusing on the velvet box in his hands. He didn't push it. His smile faltered, just for a moment, then returned, slightly strained. "Right, of course. Busy place. Well, I'm looking to sell something. A family heirloom, you see." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold locket. I nodded, relieved. "Certainly, sir. Let's take a look." I gestured towards the counter, carefully avoiding any further personal conversation. I needed to focus on the locket, on the weight of the gold, on the mechanics of appraisal, anything to distract myself from the growing unease. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the man was genuinely mistaken. Maybe I was just tired and paranoid. But the feeling lingered. The feeling that something wasn't right. I examined the locket, noting the intricate carvings and the tiny clasp. It was real gold. That much was certain, but the value wouldn't be significant. I ran my thumb over the cool metal, trying to appear professional, trying to appear normal. The clock, the one showing the wrong time, ticked silently in the corner, a constant, subtle disruption. I still hadn't adjusted it. I wasn't going to. I'd learned my lesson. I'd also realized with a growing sense of dread that my bag was still in the break room, unattended. The man watched me, his expression unreadable. I finished the appraisal, quoted a price of $320, and completed the transaction with as much efficiency as I could muster, avoiding any unnecessary interaction. He took the cash, nodded curtly, and walked out the door. As the automatic doors hissed shut behind him, I reached for the notepad. I wrote, "Man claimed familiarity, disengaged. Locket, 14-karat gold, $320. Then under it I added, break room bag, still there." I capped the pen, my hands strangely cold. I needed to get that bag now. The shop felt quieter than usual, not peaceful but expectant, like it was holding its breath. I went to the back to get my bag. It was exactly where I'd left it, slumped against the chipped formica of the break room table. Stupid, just plain stupid. Leaving it there. I should have known better, even before everything else, before the man with the locket and the wrong time on the clock and the feeling that I was being watched. I grabbed the bag. The nylon was cool and slightly damp to the touch. It smelled faintly of the apple I'd packed for lunch, and something else, something metallic, not like pennies, more like old keys. I checked the contents automatically. Wallet, phone, sketchbook, a half-eaten granola bar. Everything seemed to be there. I zipped it up a little too hard and walked back towards the counter. The fluorescent lights hummed, a constant, irritating drone. I needed to get a new bulb for the display case. Petra had mentioned it last week, but I hadn't gotten around to it. Too much going on, I guess. Too much weirdness. The shop was quiet. No customers. Just the steady tick-tock of the clock. Still stubbornly wrong. I started sorting through the jewelry under the counter, grouping earrings, necklaces, rings. It was mindless work, but it kept my hands busy. It kept me from thinking, from replaying the encounter with the man, trying to decipher his smile, his eyes. I was polishing a silver bracelet when I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored back of the display case. Just a fleeting image, my face pale and tired, framed by the cluttered shelves behind me. But something felt off. It wasn't the tiredness. I was used to that. It was something else, something about the angle, the way the light caught my face, a distortion. I stopped polishing, my hands still hovering over the bracelet. I glanced back at the display case, trying to recapture the image. It was gone, just my reflection, normal as could be. I told myself it was the lighting, the angle, the fatigue. I hadn't slept well in days, worrying about the medical bills. It was just my brain playing tricks on me. I was letting things get to me. But then I remembered something. A fragment of that ridiculous document Hemlock had forced me to read. Something about reflections, about avoiding them after a certain time, or when something was wrong. Something about not looking, not even glancing. The memory was fuzzy and incomplete, but the feeling was sharp and insistent. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I didn't think, I didn't analyze. I didn't even really decide. My hand moved before my brain could fully process what was happening. I turned away from the display case, pivoting sharply on my heel. I faced the counter, deliberately avoiding the mirrored surface. For a long moment, I stood there, breathing deeply, trying to calm my racing pulse. My wrist felt clammy. I focused on the arrangement of pens and notepads on the counter, on the chipped formica, on the dusty cash register, anything but the reflection. The silence in the shop felt heavier now, oppressive. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the back room, the faint traffic noise from the street outside, and something else. A subtle, almost imperceptible sound, like a whisper. It seemed to be coming from everywhere. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if I had looked back, I would have seen something I wasn't meant to see. Something that would have changed everything. Something that would have broken me. I stayed facing the counter for a long time. My muscles tense, my breath shallow. Eventually, the feeling of dread began to subside, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I felt drained and exhausted, as if I had run a marathon. I checked the time. It was 2:47 a.m. Still a long shift ahead. I started rearranging the pens on the counter, aligning them perfectly. It was a pointless task, a way to occupy my hands, to regain a sense of control. I noticed, as I straightened the last pen, that the bag I'd retrieved from the break room was no longer at my feet. I hadn't put it down. I hadn't moved it. It was simply gone, and I didn't dare look in the reflection to see where. I was sorting through the costume jewelry. It was a slow night, even for a Tuesday. Mostly broken necklaces, single earrings, chipped brooches. Stuff people pawned when they really needed cash, then never came back for. It always felt sad going through it, like holding someone's last resort in your hands. I was separating the silver-plated stuff from the base metal, trying to build a little pile for Lorne, who came in on Thursdays to melt it down. It was mindless work, good for distracting myself. The fluorescent lights above hummed, a constant irritating drone. I'd asked Hemlock about getting them fixed, but he just shrugged and said they'd been humming for 30 years. I doubted it. Everything in this shop felt older than 30 years, permeated with a kind of stillness that wasn't peaceful. More like waiting. I tried to focus on the tiny stampings on the clasps, the minute differences in the metal, anything to not think about the medical bills or the kids, or the fact that I was spending another night in this place. I needed to check the back corner, the one with the vintage toys. Old board games, porcelain dolls, a chipped rocking horse. Kids didn't really want that stuff anymore, not with all the screens and plastic junk out there, but people still pawned it, hoping someone would. I pushed back from the counter, stretching my lower back. It had been aching since I lifted that box of records earlier. Probably slept wrong. I started walking, and that's when I smelled it. Not a strong smell, but a subtle sweetness, like overripe fruit. It was coming from the direction of the back corner, and it made the hairs on my arms prickle. It was a cloying, sickly smell, and it didn't belong in a pawn shop filled with dust and regret. Maybe a customer had spilled something, or maybe it was coming from the toys themselves, some kind of old varnish or glue. I dismissed it. Probably just my imagination, fueled by too much coffee and not enough sleep. I was almost to the corner, rounding it quickly when a sound stopped me. Not a loud sound, more of a scrape, like something being dragged across the floor. It was faint, almost swallowed by the hum of the lights, but it was enough to make me hesitate, to slow my momentum. And then I remembered something about corners. Something about knocking. It wasn't a clear memory, more of a feeling of unease, a nagging sense of something unsaid, a fragment of Hemlock's ridiculous rules. Something about signaling your presence, about giving it time to move. I couldn't quite grasp the specifics, but the feeling was overwhelming. I stopped completely, my shoulder practically brushing the wall separating the front counter area from the toy section. I hadn't even realized how quickly I was moving. It felt reckless, foolish. I hadn't knocked. Not even thought to. I backed up a step, then another, until I was a good foot away from the corner. Then, slowly, deliberately, I raised my hand and knocked on the wall. Twice, a dull, hollow sound. I waited. 1, 2, 3. The air felt thick, stagnant. The sweet smell hadn't gone away, but it felt further away. When 3 seconds were up, I rounded the corner, and there it was. A rocking horse, not the chipped one that was always there. This one was dark wood, almost black, with a long, flowing mane and tail. It wasn't just old, it felt wrong, out of place. It hadn't been there before. And sitting on the horse, perfectly still, was a porcelain doll, a large one, with painted lips and vacant blue eyes. It wasn't one of the dolls from the display case. This one was different. It was facing away from me, towards the back wall, but I could feel its gaze on my back. I didn't look directly at the doll. I didn't even glance at it. I just took a slow step back, then another. Then I turned and walked away, as quickly as I dared. Back towards the counter, back towards the safety of the fluorescent lights and the chipped formica. The smell was gone, but the scrape? I thought I could still hear it, a faint echo in the silence. I started rearranging the costume jewelry again, this time with a frantic energy. Sorting and separating, trying to regain control. My hands were sweating. I kept glancing towards the corner, but I refused to look directly at it. I didn't need to. I knew what was there now, and I knew that I had almost walked right into it. I decided I needed more coffee, and I needed to make a note to ask Hemlock about that rocking horse. Though I had a feeling he wouldn't tell me anything useful, he never did. I also felt a sudden, overwhelming need to check on my bag. It wasn't in the break room. It wasn't anywhere I could see. And that, more than the doll, more than the smell, more than the scrape, felt like a real problem. I started counting the cash in the register. It was a slow process, mostly $1 bills and $5 bills and a scattering of crumpled $10 bills. Old Man Tiber, who owned the place, insisted on a physical count at the end of every shift, even though the system did it automatically. He said it built character. I figured it built arthritis mostly. Each bill felt slick and worn, like it had passed through 100 different hands, each carrying its own story. I tried to imagine where they'd been. A birthday present, a late-night snack, a desperate gamble. The air in the shop was still heavy with the scent of dust and regret. It always smelled like things people couldn't afford to keep, or things they were desperate to get rid of. It wasn't a bad smell. Exactly. Just sad. I focused on the numbers, adding and subtracting in my head, trying to block out the low thrum of anxiety that had been building since I found the rocking horse. It was stupid, I told myself. A doll and a horse, just things. Old things. People bought and sold old things all the time. This place was full of them. I was almost done with the first stack when I noticed him. Or her. It was hard to tell from the back, silhouetted in the dim light of the waiting area. Someone was sitting in one of the plastic chairs, facing the front window, and it was definitely after closing. I'd locked the front door myself 10 minutes ago. I checked the digital clock on the microwave. It was 2:17 a.m. A customer lingering. That happened sometimes. People lost track of time or fell asleep. Usually it was someone waiting for a bus that didn't run until dawn. I glanced at the security cameras, but the view of the waiting area was partially obscured by a display of baseball cards. I could see a head, shoulders, and a dark coat, nothing else. It felt wrong. Not in a scary way, not yet, but off, like a dropped stitch in a carefully knitted sweater. I remembered something. A fragment of the laminated sheet Hemlock had made me read on my first night. Something about after hours, people waiting, don't approach alone, alert a coworker, except there was no coworker. It was just me. And Hemlock wasn't exactly reachable at this hour. He lived out in the county and always kept his phone off. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they'd snuck in somehow. Maybe they were hiding from someone. Maybe they were just cold. People did strange things when they were cold. I considered calling the police, but for what? A person sitting in a chair? They hadn't done anything wrong. It would just be a waste of everyone's time. And honestly, I didn't want to deal with the paperwork, or Hemlock's inevitable lecture about handling things myself. The thought of walking over there, of actually talking to them, made my stomach clench. I could feel a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, a familiar response to stress that always felt like tiny insects crawling under my skin. It wasn't a pleasant sensation. I shifted in my chair, trying to ignore it. I remembered the phrase, or what I remembered of it. Something about not approaching alone if someone was there after hours. Something about it not being beneficial. It wasn't a direct threat, not exactly, just a warning, a very specific warning. And I'd ignored enough warnings already tonight, hadn't I? The bag, the corners, the reflections. I finished counting the cash, double-checked the totals, and printed out the deposit slip. I had to finish closing up. I couldn't just sit here staring at a shadowy figure. I started shutting down the registers one by one. Each click and whir felt unnaturally loud in the silence. I avoided looking towards the waiting area. I focused on the task at hand, on the mundane routine of closing up shop. As I was turning off the last register, I realized I needed to lock the glass display case with the antique watches. It was right next to the waiting area, and I couldn't reach the key without walking past it. I froze. My hand hovered over the register, the key dangling from my fingers. I looked at the waiting area, but the figure hadn't moved. Still sitting, still facing the window, a dark, silent shape in the gloom. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't bring myself to walk over there. Not alone. Not after everything else. I left the display case unlocked. It felt wrong. Terribly wrong. Those watches were worth a fortune. Hemlock would be furious, but I couldn't risk it. I just couldn't. I finished the rest of the closing routine, locking the front door, arming the alarm, and turning off the lights. I didn't look at the waiting area again. I didn't want to know if the figure was still there. As I walked to my car, the weight of the unlocked display case settled on my shoulders. Not the monetary loss, not the fear of Hemlock's wrath. Something else. A sense of compromise, of letting something slide, of choosing fear over responsibility, and the realization that whatever was happening here, it wasn't just about following rules, it was about what you were willing to leave undone. I was sorting through the costume jewelry. It was the least awful part of the job, honestly. Mostly chipped plastic and tarnished silver, but every now and then something real would turn up. A decent cameo, a gold-filled locket. Tonight it was mostly beads, mountains of them. I was separating the strands by color, trying to make some semblance of order out of the chaos. It was soothing, in a way. Repetitive, like a really boring meditation. I kept glancing at the security monitors even though there was nothing to see. Empty parking lot, dark storefronts across the street. Just the usual late-night quiet. I hadn't seen a customer in hours, not since Old Man Hemlock had locked up and given me the usual grumble about the state of the world. He'd been particularly fixated on the unlocked display case. He didn't actually ask about it, just kept muttering about irresponsible youth and the decline of everything. I just nodded and pretended to be busy polishing the counter. The radio was on, a static-filled country station that usually droned into the background. I'd tried switching it off, but the silence felt worse. It made the shop feel bigger, more empty. Like something was listening. I fiddled with the volume, turning it up a notch until the singer's voice was almost drowning out the static. I realized I hadn't thought about the twins all that much since I started the shift. Usually their faces are looping in my head. Little cartoon versions of them I sketch while I'm supposed to be paying attention. I pulled out my phone, no new messages, no goofy drawings to brighten my night, just the same old pile of bills waiting to be paid. The medical bills mostly. It felt like they were always there, looming over everything. The digital clock on the microwave blinked 1:58, except it wasn't PM. It was definitely AM. I glanced at the wall clock, the one with the big, sweeping second hand. 1:58 AM. The microwave was off by 12 hours. Again, it had been doing it for a few weeks. Now I'd mentioned it to Hemlock once, but he'd just waved his hand and said it was cheap electronics. I hadn't bothered to fix it. It felt safer somehow to just leave it wrong. Like acknowledging the discrepancy would be a mistake. Then I remembered the little snippet of paper from the orientation binder. Something about a time. And a door. It wasn't a clear memory. More like a feeling of urgency. A specific time and a place to check. The roof. The roof access door. It said something about locking it and not looking up. I scoffed. Seriously? Checking the roof? This place was getting weirder by the minute. Probably just some old security measure Hemlock hadn't bothered to update. It was probably unlocked half the time anyway. Still, I couldn't shake the idea that I was supposed to do it, that something wanted me to do it. I dismissed it as exhaustion. I hadn't been sleeping well. Worrying about the bills, about Sarah, about everything. It was making me paranoid. But the feeling didn't go away. It pressed on me. The numbers on the microwave, 1:58, seemed to pulse, and I remembered the phrase, or what I thought was the phrase. At 2, the door. It was fragmented, incomplete, but it was enough. I sighed and stood up, leaving the pile of costume jewelry on the counter. I grabbed the flashlight from under the register and headed towards the back of the shop. The door to the roof access was a heavy steel thing, tucked away in a narrow hallway near the bathrooms. It was always cold back there. The air felt different, stale, damp. The door was unlocked, just as I half expected. I shone the flashlight on the lock. Old, rusty, it probably hadn't been used in months, or maybe years. I fumbled with the key, my hands clumsy and cold. The lock clicked open with a loud metallic snap that echoed in the hallway. I turned the key, locking the door. It took a bit of effort, the mechanism stiff and resistant. As I turned it, I felt a shift in the air. A subtle change in pressure, like something had moved, something large, above me. I didn't look up. I remembered the instruction, do not look up. I didn't even want to, but my eyes flickered towards the ceiling, involuntarily. Just a glimpse. For a split second, I thought I saw something, a dark shape against the gray concrete of the roof. Something large and indistinct. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person. It was a weight, a bulk, a shifting darkness. It wasn't on the roof, exactly. It was above it. Then it was gone, or maybe I blinked. Maybe it was just a shadow. But the feeling lingered, a cold, prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I finished locking the door, my fingers numb. I turned and walked quickly back to the front of the shop, not running, but moving with a newfound urgency. I didn't bother with the costume jewelry. I didn't turn on the radio. I just sat back down behind the counter and stared at the security monitors. The parking lot was still empty. The storefronts were still dark, but everything felt different. Heavier, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I hadn't seen anything concrete, just a fleeting impression, a shadow. But I knew with a sickening certainty that whatever it was, it had noticed me, and that locking that door hadn't protected me from it. It had just acknowledged that I knew it was there, and now I was waiting. I was sorting through the jewelry again, trying to get a handle on what we had and what was just junk. Old costume necklaces, broken bracelets, single earrings. It was mostly junk. Petra, the day manager, would get on me about it, saying it needed to be organized better. But honestly, what was the point? It all sold for pennies on the dollar if it sold at all. I was meticulously separating the gold-plated from the silver tone, trying to build some kind of system, when I noticed something was off. It wasn't a big thing. Not initially, just a feeling. Like a piece of the scenery had been subtly rearranged. I paused, put down a tangled mess of beads, and looked around. The shop wasn't large, but it was cluttered, stuffed with things. Guitars hanging on the walls, TVs stacked in the corner, boxes overflowing with VHS tapes. It was easy to miss something. My gaze landed on the industrial shelving unit along the back wall, the one we used for larger items, old radios, boomboxes, occasionally a dented trombone. That shelf seemed closer to the wall than I remembered. Not by much, maybe an inch, 2 inches, but it had always been flush, tucked right up against the paneling. I ran a hand along the side of it, feeling for resistance. It wasn't touching the wall. There was a gap. A small gap, but a definite one. About 6 inches. I frowned. Had someone moved it? Petra? Maybe? She was always rearranging things, trying to improve the flow. But she wouldn't have done it without telling me, would she? And it was a heavy unit. It took 2 people to move it easily. I glanced around the shop again, checking the security monitors. Nothing. Just empty darkness. It was probably just me. Being tired. My eyes playing tricks on me. I'd been on shift for almost 8 hours, staring at tiny pieces of metal and glass. My vision was probably blurring. I rubbed my eyes, then looked back at the shelf, still not touching the wall. That's when I remembered the memo. The stupid, cryptic memo I'd found tucked into the employee handbook. Something about furniture and logging changes. If furniture or equipment has been moved overnight from its established position, log it but do not move it back. It had struck me as utterly bizarre at the time. Some kind of weird safety regulation maybe. Or a joke. I dismissed it pretty quickly. It felt unrelated to anything real. But now, looking at this shelf, I wasn't so sure. The wording was so specific, moved overnight. Nobody had been in the shop since I'd locked up the previous evening, except for whatever I'd seen or thought I'd seen on the roof. And the instruction wasn't to fix it, it was to log it, not to question it, just to acknowledge the alteration. I fished the logbook out from under the counter, the one Petra insisted on keeping for everything from broken light bulbs to customer complaints. I flipped to a fresh page and scribbled down the date and time. Industrial shelving unit, back wall, moved approximately 6 inches from wall, facing slightly east. No visible cause. It felt ridiculous. I was logging a moved shelf in a pawn shop at 3 in the morning. I considered nudging it back into place. Just a little. It would look better. It would feel better. But the instruction echoed in my head. Do not move it back. There was something about the phrasing, a subtle undercurrent of warning, like moving it back would be a violation, a transgression. I closed the logbook and set it aside. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to explain it. It was just a shelf. Moved a few inches? I could work around it. I had to. It wasn't worth risking whatever weirdness was apparently lurking in the corners of this place. I carefully rearranged the display of vintage radios on the shelf, making sure nothing was going to fall off. It was awkward. The new angle made it harder to reach. I had to stretch and contort myself to get everything positioned just right. It was frustrating. The clock ticked on the wall. 3:17 a.m. Still no customers. Still just the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint static from the security monitors. I went back to sorting jewelry, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't the same feeling as after locking the roof door. This was more focused, like something was paying attention to me specifically, and to the shelf. I kept glancing at the shelf, trying to catch something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, a movement. But there was nothing. Just the radios, silent and still, and the gap. That small, unsettling gap between the shelf and the wall. I decided to check the security footage. Maybe something had happened while I was in the back room. I rewound the cameras to 1 a.m., then fast-forwarded through the empty hours. Nothing. No one entered the shop. No one even walked past the windows. The parking lot remained deserted. But then, as I was about to give up, I paused the footage. 2:53 a.m. A flicker. A distortion in the image near the back wall. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like a heat shimmer, and for a fraction of a second, the shelf looked different, more angled, more distant from the wall. I rewound and played it again, and again each time, the flicker was there. And each time the shelf seemed to shift just slightly. It wasn't a clear movement. It was more like the image itself was warping around the shelf, as if something was bending the light. I killed the footage. I didn't want to see it again. I didn't want to think about it. I just wanted to get through the rest of my shift. I went back to the jewelry, forcing myself to concentrate on the tiny glittering stones. But it was no use. The image of the shifting shelf was burned into my mind, and the feeling of being watched had intensified. I was aware of every shadow, every creak of the building, every breath I took. The air felt thick and heavy, and the gap between the shelf and the wall seemed to be growing. Not physically, maybe, but in my perception. It was a void now, a space where something didn't belong. And I knew, with a cold certainty, that it was only a matter of time before I found out what. The automatic door hissed open, and I stepped out into the gray morning. It was 6:15 a.m., and the sky was that flat pre-dawn color that always made my throat feel tight. I hadn't seen a single customer all night. Just the radios and the jewelry and everything. Bev was already unlocking the front doors when I got to my car. She gave me a tired smile. "Rough night?" "Quiet," I said, which wasn't a lie, just incomplete. Nothing much happened. I fumbled with my keys, avoiding eye contact. I didn't want to explain the shifted shelf, or the flicker on the security feed, or the way the air felt like it was pressing in on me. It sounded ridiculous even in my head. Probably just stress. I'd been skipping my medication, trying to stretch the refills until the next paycheck. That had to be it. Bev was already inside, sorting the mail. I unlocked the car, grabbed my bag, the one I'd almost forgotten to pick up from the break room, a detail that made my stomach clench, and headed for the door. The fluorescent lights of the parking lot felt harsh against my eyes. I drove straight home. Didn't bother with coffee, didn't bother calling my wife to let her know I was almost there. I just wanted to be inside, to be normal. I parked in the driveway, killed the engine, and sat for a minute staring at the house. It didn't look any different, but it felt distant, like I was looking at a photograph of my life. I finally got out of the car and walked toward the front door. I noticed the garage door was slightly ajar. That was odd. My wife, Elma, is meticulous about closing it. I stopped on the porch, listening. Silence. I reached for the doorknob and then hesitated. I had this impulse to knock. A quick, automatic rap on the wood, it felt necessary. Like a reflex. I hadn't even realized I was doing it until my knuckles hit the door. It was stupid. We don't knock on our own door, but I couldn't shake it. I knocked again, just to be sure. Elma opened the door, her face creased with concern. "Kieran?" What are you doing? Just checking, I said, feeling my face flush. I thought I heard something in the garage. She frowned. The garage door was open a crack. I must have forgotten to close it when I took out the recycling. She didn't seem to notice anything was off. I went inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Elma had been baking. That was good. Normal. I hugged her, trying to absorb some of her warmth, her normalcy. It didn't quite take. The kids were still asleep. I went to check on them, just to make sure. My son Leo was sprawled across his bed, clutching a stuffed dinosaur. My daughter Maisie was curled up with her favorite blanket. I sketched a quick cartoon of Leo wrestling the dinosaur, a little joke to send them in the morning. But my hand felt unsteady, the lines wavering. I spent the rest of the day trying to sleep, but I couldn't. Every creak of the house, every passing car, sounded like something else. I kept checking the locks on the doors and windows. I checked them again and again. I found myself avoiding the hallway mirror. Not because I was afraid of seeing something, but because, well, I didn't know why. It just felt wrong to look. That evening, Elma suggested we go to the park. It was a beautiful fall day, and the kids were eager to go. I agreed, but as we walked through the park gates, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. The park was full of families, laughing children, dogs chasing frisbees. It should have been relaxing, but it wasn't. The playground had a large, mirrored panel built into the side of the climbing structure. It was intended to distort reflections to make the kids laugh. I steered the children away from it, telling them it was too crowded. Elma raised an eyebrow but didn't question me. I found myself scanning the perimeter of the park, checking the angles of the trees, the placement of the benches, looking for something. I didn't know what, just something out of place. I haven't been back to that park since. It's not that I'm afraid, it's just harder to enjoy it. Every time I think about going, I feel that same tightening in my chest. I find myself taking a different route home from work, avoiding that side of town altogether. It's a small adjustment, an easy one, but it's there. A constant, quiet recalibration, and I suspect it always will be. The job posting for the overnight clerk at the pawn shop is still up online. I saw it yesterday, scrolling through the classifieds. It's been relisted a few times. I didn't click on it. I didn't need to. Someone else will. Someone else will read the rules. Someone else will spend a night with the radios and the jewelry and the things that don't belong.